Sarah Maddison is a research coordinator at the School of Social and Political Science at the University of Melbourne in Australia and joins us now live. Good to speak to you this morning, or good afternoon to you there in Australia. Just how divided are Australians over this issue of immigration? That's been one of the main talking points at this election, hasn't it?
Well, I wish I could say that it was. Sadly, the question of a refugee and asylum seeker policy in Australia has had very little airtime, in fact, during the election campaign. Both major parties in Australia agree broadly on policies such as offshore detention, despite the fact that a rising number of Australians are increasingly unhappy with that policy and would like to see some genuine moral leadership on that question.
So, Sarah, if Malcolm Turnbull is voted out and is replaced by his Liberal opponent, will there be much of a change in the way Australia sort of looks outwardly towards the world?
No, not really. The Labor Party, should they win office, which is still unlikely, even though the polls are showing that the election will be tight, there won't be a fundamental difference in our international policy, in our foreign affairs policy, nor in our policies with regard to asylum seekers and refugees. There may be some changes in domestic policy, particularly around health and education, where the Labor Party has traditionally been stronger. But in many ways, the two major parties in Australia are ideologically quite similar, which is some of the reason that many Australians are disaffected and somewhat disinterested with Australian elections at the moment.
Well, Sarah, if they're so closely linked, I mean, of course we have to have elections and it's compulsory voting in Australia, but voters there must be quite miffed that they can't really choose a big difference. What has been exercising voters' minds, and what do they actually want to see done?
Well, what we will see as an outcome of this election is a very diverse Senate. We'll see probably an increase in participation and membership and success from the Greens, other minor parties and independents. We should see quite a diverse group in the Senate. We've seen this in the last couple of elections in Australia as voters look for someone who is distinctly different from the two major parties. So that should be a very interesting outcome. It will take probably a week or so before we really know the makeup of the Senate, but that will... Interesting, given that the election was called, a double dissolution election was called because the Prime Minister wanted to produce a Senate that he could control more effectively. In fact, it looks like the outcome will be a less controllable Senate. So interesting times ahead.
Absolutely will be. Well, Sarah Maddison, we thank you for joining us here on TRT World. Thank you.